CW.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ted Boscana, Director of the Historic Trades and Skills Department here at Colonial Williamsburg. Today we're going to be talking about more than the arts and mysteries, really looking at the journeyman level within our trade structure and talking about the kind of important work that we do here, but also what we base our work on. Research is going to be one of those critical elements, relevance, interpretation, and the other piece of that is preservation. So all of those things together are really the mission of trades, to continue to bring these trades to our guests, to keep them alive and to keep them relevant to our modern audience. So with that in mind, I'd like to make some introductions and tell you who we've got with us. We'll start with Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Sandbury. I'm a journeyman carpenter, and I've been here at Colonial Williamsburg for just about 7 years now.
Preston?
Hello, I'm Preston Jones. I'm a journeyman silversmith here in Colonial Williamsburg. I've been working with Colonial Williamsburg for 46 years.
And Teal, please.
I'm Teal Brooks. I'm a journeyman historic gardener, and I've been with Colonial Williamsburg for 6.5 years, and in the garden 5 of those years, and I've just finished up my apprenticeship and become a journeyman this beginning of this year.
That's great. Again, I'm Ted, and I have been with the foundation for 32 years. Started at the bake shop and then got into the trades department, took a summer job and just and never left. So I've enjoyed my time here. So we've talked about how long, and Preston, you've got the longest amount of time. So how did you get started in this work?
Started as a young person. I was in high school. I needed a job and started with Colonial Williamsburg. If you've been here, your family's worked here. I grew up here about a mile away from my actual shop here. And so I got a job here in Colonial Williamsburg working in the information center, it was called at the time, and I worked in the distribution center. And then shortly after that, I got into the apprenticeship program. Mr. Curtis, a nice man who taught me the skills of silversmithing, the trade. So here I am 46 years later.
That's great. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Western New York, and I got my start at a living history museum up there. So right after high school, I started there lasted at another museum for 10 years before transitioning here to Colonial Williamsburg, again 7 years ago. Like history and like working with my hands, and really this is the kind of the work you want to do if you like those two passions.
And Teal?
So I came to Colonial Williamsburg originally having had a career in gardening and farming in the modern side of things. Had worked on various organic farms and even ran my own farm for a little bit. But decided I wanted to change gears and give the museum world a try. And now I still get to do working with plants and growing things that I love, but now get to share that with people, which is really exciting. And the history side of it was what was new for me, and I'm really enjoying that.
That's great. So if any time you have questions, please send them in. We'll get to them as we move through the program. Whatever we do here at Colonial Williamsburg, whether it's within trades or our hospitality team or going to any of the buildings or sites, we always want to keep the audience in mind and our guests that are visiting us. So with that in mind, we're gonna watch a video that talks a little bit about relevance, why we do this work.
We have to know what came before in order to truly progress in a solid fashion into the future.
Because this is the basis or precursor to a lot of the way modern medicine is functioning, It's something that everyone can relate to. We find that the medical professionals, particularly the pharmacists, will be able to relate to the ideas of the 18th century and the medicines that were used, and it has given them some opportunity to explore and expand modern research to develop new ideas in medicine.
Buildings are only getting older. So when buildings are having issues, it's important to know what's going on and not make repairs that look appropriate and know that you're not doing something to a building that's not reversible. We never want to, fix a building and 20 years later, it's causing the building to fail. Handwork is absolutely valuable here in Colonial Williamsburg, especially.
The interesting thing about 18th century drumming is that a lot of that is still very relevant today. Modern marching bands use a lot of the same techniques, styles. You'll see a lot of modern marching bands actually, the drummers will hold their sticks in the same way that we did in the 18th century, with the left hand obviously holding the stick a little differently than the right. A lot of the rudiments themselves, the short little rhythmic patterns that we played in the 18th century to learn how to play music, they use a lot of those same rudiments, and those are very important in skill building for new drummers, as much today as they were in the 18th century.
If you come to the Palace Kitchen on any day and you look at our table, you will see we have a phenomenal amount of food out there. And you're going to say to me, but we eat like this today. And I'm going to go, yes, you do. We have more fruit in this time period, more vegetables in this time period than what we eat today. We are very narrow-minded. Carrots, onions, cabbage. That's what we think of today as broccoli, cauliflower. In the 18th century, you have kohlrabi, you have scurvy grass. We cook by season and eat by season.
I think the work that we do in the blacksmith shop is important because we're doing the restoration and the reconstruction projects that are needed to preserve the buildings that we have here at Colonial Williamsburg. So we're making the tools for the other tradespeople so they can do their work. We're making the hardware that's needed on the buildings as they wear out or break, or if we're reconstructing a building that's missing.
Our original buildings are the most tangible thing that we have. You can literally touch something from the 18th century when it's not behind a glass box. All these materials that we make, all these buildings, and you think about the humanity in them. Whereas today, buildings, the humanity is kind of being slowly taken out of it, being automated. So you can look at a blacksmith can look at a nail and know how it was made, and kind of think of putting yourself in that position. For brick, you literally fingerprints in the brick. So I kind of enjoy that connection when you can look at a building and start to think about how many hands it took to build one building.
Observation is a great teacher. Looking at what they wrote as case histories and publishing those case histories, these are the things that really shape how the 18th century thought, and that helps us in terms of trying to think today.
Well, that's what some of our colleagues had to say. Matt, what do you think of when you think of relevance? Why do 18th century work now?
Yeah, so the relevance of carpentry. So carpentry is still an active trade being done today in modern day world, but the carpentry has shifted. It's changed so much from the work that was being done 250 years ago that truly our job is not the same anymore. So where the relevance of our job at Colonial Williamsburg comes in is really when we're talking about restoration work or preserving these buildings, both here and throughout the world, really. So that's really one of the goals for us to keep the trade alive for future preservation.
That's great. How about you two?
From the gardening side of things, you can preserve the hand skills, but one of the things that's also really important to preserve is the actual varieties of plants that we're growing. Seeds have a limited number of years that they're viable. If someone stops growing a variety of seed, it's gone forever. So preserving that very tangible thing by continuing to grow them in our gardens, and also inspiring people to maybe grow historic varieties back in their own homes.
That's great. Impressive.
What we do in Colonial Williamsburg in the silversmith shop and cast ingots of silver and just hammering out the different various items that we have. Today you go into stores and you see like a spoon and fork flatware sets and all. They're all stamped out by machines, and people don't see the hand craftsman part of it. So it's important for us to keep that trade going like the rest of our colleagues here. To keep that going by hand and keeping it alive using 18th century techniques and tools that we have available to us today.
So it's often kind of seen that many of these trades don't have a place in the modern world, but it's really the work that's being done in the 18th century that lays a lot of the groundwork for technology today. It's important for our audience and guests to remember when they're seeing trades being practiced here, or even the skills, we're right at the cusp of the Industrial Revolution. So this is really the last generation of people that were doing work almost in an unaltered way from much further back into time. So the handwork that you see here being done, there's a celebration of handwork today, and we see that across many different trades and skills. So to know how to do this work, there's a lot of research that goes into it. And when we talk about research, it's important to kind of put that into two kind of broader categories. The academic research, looking at primary sources and historic text, but also just trying to rediscover processes through experimentation. This type of work is often called experimental archaeology, trying to relearn processes that weren't necessarily written down, or as I always like to say it, sometimes we have the original object and we have the tools, but we didn't always have the instruction manual that takes you through the process of putting something together. So we have to kind of fill in those blanks. So research is a really important component to what we do here in Trades and Skills, and we're going to let our colleagues here in this video talk to you a little bit about it.
Well, we have around 200 cookbooks from the 18th century that we go by. I am always browsing through them and looking for recipes that I have not done yet in the 23 years that I've worked here. And you'd be surprised, I do a couple of them a week, just different recipes that I've never made before, because we have so many cookbooks to read.
There's the type of research that you're doing in the library or collections, and then there is the type of research that you're doing in the shop, physically making the artifact. Probably 75% of that is in the shop, just physically making that thing, and maybe making multiples of that thing to try to work out the process or procedure, the steps of manufacture, and then taking that piece that you've made and sometimes revisiting the original one and putting them side by side to compare them, to make sure that you haven't missed something, make sure that you don't have to tweak something in the process. A lot of times you're talking with the other colleagues in the shop to shoot ideas back and forth to figure out, if they have an idea to solve a problem, or if they've done something different in the past, or so there's a lot of talking back and forth between the tradespeople. And that's one of the advantages of working at Colonial Williamsburg that we have in the shop that you don't get in a private shop.
I would say one of the biggest universal lessons that I've learned is sort of the importance of knowing what you do and don't know, and being willing to admit what you don't know and learn. One of the biggest things that sometimes guests can teach us, I think, is what we don't know and what we might want to find out. In the 18th century, there was not a lot of written music for drummers in particular. Other instrumentalists had, some written music, although standard notation wasn't really a thing yet. So you sort of have to learn how to read each composer's style of writing music. But for drummers, we were lucky if we had anything at all. So a lot of the interpretation, a lot of the research that I end up having to do ends up kind of being an educated guess. I have to look at the patterns that we do have for written music in the 18th century for drumming and try to apply those to various other tunes, or just see if, does this drum beat fit with this fife beat, or can I take something from how this drum beat, interacts with this other fife beat and find similarities here to sort of make those arrangements work.
What I've been working on recently is transcribing the Galton Barad account books. This work has been put off for many years because most of us who worked at the apothecary did not have the base knowledge to be able to understand what we were seeing and to be able to look at the Latin words that were in these account books. Finishing up this work, transcribing the rest of these account books, and then taking this transcription and summarizing it in a way that can be used to further our understanding of how the doctors who were practicing here did their job.
Honestly, I think that the best research that we've done is making those connections between our 18th century counterparts, our 19th century counterparts, and our early 20th century counterparts. One of the more interesting stories for our trade actually is really how Colonial Williamsburg gets started. You can read reports about Hedgecock and his crew from North Carolina and his molder, Babe Sowers, who they said could make 4,000 bricks in a day. That's the guy who made all the brick for the Palace, the Capitol, the Raleigh Tavern. And that in itself is an 18th century, but it absolutely connects to the 18th century. And really, that's the genesis of our trade shop here at Colonial Williamsburg.
Some of our fellow colleagues had to say about research. Matt, what do you think is important with research?
Yeah, so researching, of course, is one of the most important parts of our job, making sure we're doing this trade correct, as correct as we can today, right? So research is always kind of a moving target, and we're always trying to get more and more accurate throughout the time. But how we do that in the carpentry world here, the best way to do it is by analyzing the original buildings. Right? So here at Colonial Williamsburg, we have 89 of them. So for us to look at how these buildings were built, analyzing the tools, so that's the tool marks that are left on the pieces of wood, is going to indicate where we can focus our tooling and how they were using the tooling, and trying to replicate those marks in the construction of the reproductions is always going to be a good place to begin. Looking at things like layout and how they were organizing the cutting of that frame is also another good place to look. So I guess by analyzing the original pieces is better than if we were to look at the documentation of it. And certainly there's some of that, but here at Colonial Williamsburg there's a lot more of the original stuff. So that's where we're going to focus more often.
It's great, yeah, and having such so many original buildings really makes it a great place to study that work. We also have an extensive silver collection, and I'm sure that you do some object-based study with that. Do you look at other things as well, Preston?
Absolutely, absolutely. Colonial Williamsburg has a vast collection of silver items, so we can actually look at the original pieces, look at the construction of it, which is really something that I like to do, is going into the museum and looking at some of the pieces we have. We just recently acquired a Paul Revere tanker. That's pretty awesome. I had a chance to go to Winterthur and actually look at some of Paul Revere's father's pieces and look at how those things were constructed. So researching that part of it, we get to hold the pieces like Matt was saying, and they have original buildings here. And we can actually look at, see the same problems that they had in making these pieces and all. And also the research part of it, of who made these things, different people who were making these things, enslaved people were a part of this, and women who were also constructing these items as well. So the part about what we don't read about, we can see certain objects, but we have to read about, and hopefully we can get some documentations on actual people who were doing this, who were not the norm of the silversmiths and people we see today.
Yeah, that is such an important part, that we're not only using the objects to talk about them, but really history is a story about people, and that's certainly true within the trades, and looking at all the varieties of people that were doing this work. So with Preston and Matt, you've got, again, a lot of original materials to look at. That's not necessarily the case with what you have, Teal, right?
Yeah, I mean, here, in Williamsburg, I mean, a lot of what at our site we're drawing from are, 18th century published books on gardening, kind of aimed at these hobby gardeners. We can look at letters, journals, inventories. But you can see the importance in continuing to do research, just looking around town and see that it's not a static thing. Many of our gardens that are preserved today were the 1930s, idea of what a colonial garden should be, and now they are historic in their own right. That's kind of your colonial revival style garden. On our site, we're lucky we get to do a little bit more experimentation, kind of try new things out, and that also allows us to, to do research on site.
Yeah, all of that stuff is really important. I think, again, when we talk about research, looking at original objects, trying to rediscover processes, I always think of when I was working in the joinery shop and was trying to rediscover how to make an oil varnish. I had the ability to walk around town and ask lots of other colleagues within the department. I also asked folks from our collections and conservation department, and really tried to approach it from as broad a spectrum as possible. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it took cooking 25 batches before we finally got something that we were happy with. But I can't imagine how many batches we would have had to cook without that additional knowledge that the others contributed. Speaking of contributing, we're happy to take any questions that we might have at this point.
Yeah, and thank you, Ted and Matt, Preston, and Teal. This is Bill Pavlak, one of the Trades Tuesdays producers, and I'll be relaying our viewers' questions onto the panelists today. I have one from Tina, and we've heard about your stories and your sort of origin stories here at Colonial Williamsburg. She was wondering what we can do today or what we're doing to help draw young folks into apprenticeships.
Well, one of the things that we have that I don't think a lot of folks are aware of, it was suspended during COVID, but we're looking to bring it back, is we have a junior interpreter program where we're bringing in kids into various trades as volunteers. But we also have a program that is our junior apprentice program, where we're bringing in a rising junior from high school into the shops, a specific shop, and they will work their junior and senior year during the school year, usually on the weekends, and then during the summer, as much as they can work during the course of the summer. This not only exposes them to the trades, but it gives them skills in public presentation, because ultimately they are interpreting. The benefit to Colonial Williamsburg is that we're putting kids into these shops, and that's really what you would have seen in the 18th century, especially when we talk about apprentices. Today our apprentices typically don't start until they're in their 20s. In the 18th century, typically by the time you're 14, you've made a decision as to what you were going to be doing for the rest of your life. And that's something I like to share with school groups to help them understand the kind of differences and advantages that they have today in the modern world. So I think that those programs, as well as trying to reach out through digital media to other folks, I think these are our attempts right now to try and get younger folks interested. Do you guys have anything else you'd like to add to that?
It's a really good program. We had a young man, and I saw him grow. He was for 4 years, and he was like about my height. And then after he left, he was very much taller. But it was really neat, and his confidence level was really awesome. He was very shy when he came in, and his parents said they've seen a change in him. That he's much more confident about interpreting to people and so forth. So it's a really good program.
Yeah. So thank you for the question. With all of this great stuff that we have here at the museum, it really lacks any significance unless we put it into context. And to do that, we do that through interpretation. Interpretation is how we share the stories of not only the objects, but the people of the past that were doing this work. And we're going to watch this video and look at how our colleagues talk about interpretation.
You can come and you can see and hear the fifes and drums, but until we actually talk about what we're doing, it's just a cool performance that you watch. It may not make sense to you why we would do things in a certain way, why we hold our sticks the way we do, why we play on a fife at all instead of a bugle. The importance of interpretation is providing that context.
Interpretation is a very specific and dynamic way of teaching, where we have to condense everything we need them to know. We have to distill that into that 5 minutes and keep it very engaging. If you can't do that interpretation, if you can't synthesize that, it's very hard for you to find that specific way that one guest might need to hear something in order for it to register.
All that knowledge base that we learn over the years, we get to relate that to the visitors that come in the door. They're coming in sometimes for the first time, or sometimes they're people that come in multiple times a year, but sometimes you just tell them what you're making. Sometimes you're telling them in-depth stuff of how iron is made or where the materials are coming from. I think it's important that all that information has to come together, and you can't walk away and consult a book. You just have to know it and throw it out there on the table.
The importance of interpretation to me is letting you all understand the kinds of foods that was available in the 18th century and comparing them to today. The knowledge that you gain in our kitchen you will always use at home in your own.
To me, it's just really important to get across that these people were not the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, that they are enlightened, they are trying to be scientific, and they're doing the best job they can with the base knowledge that they have.
These people were smart in the 18th century. When you're doing the exact same work they're doing, you can get inside their headspace. And I think that's a very cool process.
At the end of the day, no matter how we feel as we're doing our job, we're tired because we've been sawing that log all day, or we've been hammering that same teapot up all day long, that every new person that comes in has to get the best that we can possibly provide.
So that's what our folks in the department are thinking in terms of interpretation. For the museum, again, this is how we get information across, but it's more than just giving information. What does interpretation mean to you, Teal?
I mean, if guests walk into our garden and none of us are there to interpret it, they're still going to have a good experience. They're going to see a beautiful garden, but they might make assumptions about that space. Without context, they might think that this is the sort of garden everyone had, in the time period, growing vegetables in their backyard, but it's actually only the garden that a very wealthy household would have been able to keep. It represents a lot of wealth. And with us there, we can explain that, and we can also, share other stories. We can make sure we're talking about all of the people, whether it's the professional gardeners, whether it's the enslaved, that are working in those gardens, and otherwise people wouldn't come away with those stories. And also the interactive component. I mean, if someone just comes and listens to us talk, that's one thing, but they also have the opportunity to interact and ask questions. And a lot of our guests have gardens at home, so they can ask us garden questions, they can share about their own gardens, and that's really rewarding.
That's great. What about you, Preston?
With silver, starting with the ingot of silver, a lot of people don't realize what it starts with, where the silver comes from. So we can interpret that. Again, the tools we have in the shop, hammering something out, picking a piece of ore from the ground and melting it down, making something really beautiful from it, a spoon, a coffee pot, a bowl, or something like that. Talking about the price of silver. Silver was money, money was silver. So there's different aspects to interpretation, and it's just important to have that going on, doing what we do in Colonial Williamsburg, making objects and very nice things.
That's great. So we also always have to kind of keep our audience in mind, and that is certainly true. My apprenticeship was in the carpenter's yard, so Matt certainly is familiar with this, but not only at the yard, but throughout the foundation, we see all different types of groups of folks that are coming in, school groups, family groups, couples, and we have to make sure that our interpretation is really linking up with their interest. So that's something that is always important for us to keep in mind. So Matt, what do you think about when you think about interpretation?
Yeah, I really do like the word interpretation, almost as if history is a different language. Because in a way, these trades are. They're so alien to a modern day perspective in most cases. So like I was saying earlier in this, carpentry has changed so much since it really was 250 years ago. And Preston kind of put it out there pretty well when he was talking about how we start with something and have to progress through to generate a product. And oftentimes, we here at Colonial Williamsburg are doing a lot more than our historic counterparts ever would have. So we're portraying we are actually building buildings in my case, or different products around Colonial Williamsburg, but we're starting with something that they never would have. So in my case, starting with a tree. I have to talk about that, but that's not carpentry. That's material production. So being able to take that context and enlarge it to somebody who may have never picked up a hammer in their life, or someone whose job depends on using a hammer every day. The skill level that comes into the doors here at Colonial Williamsburg is going to vary. So we have to be able to adapt and explain our message to all sorts of people, and that's really what we're here to do.
That's good interpretation. So, all of these interpretive moments will often lead to those kind of aha moments or very satisfying moments. So we're going to hear about some of those satisfying moments from our colleagues in the department.
Well, one of my nicest moments working in the palace kitchen is when I was talking about 18th century food and about America in the 18th century. This gentleman came to me and he said, "Wow," he said, "you're an English woman and you know more about the American history than what I do."
2014, we had a great opportunity to collaborate with Historic Jamestown. Our staff made materials, and actually myself and another journeyman worked with Historic Jamestown and actually did the restoration of the church tower. The only thing that's 17th century above ground inside the fort, we were able to work on for a couple summers, and that was incredibly rewarding.
I believe it was the first year I came here, I was asked to help work on a set of miniature jeweler's tools. So these were fully functional, what we called toys in the 18th century. They're fully functional miniatures in precious materials. So there was a jeweler's saw. Jeweler's saw is usually going to sit about this tall, looks like a coping saw, but it has a sliding frame. We reduced it to 2 inches tall, fully functional, silver, gold, ivory handle. We also made a miniature engraving tool that went with this set, and a tiny case with saw blades and a couple other pieces. And this was actually in memory of our first woman journeyman that we had in the shop, Gail Clark. That was incredibly satisfying, making that kind of piece. There's something about the preciousness of it. It's amazing.
I just really enjoy the work as a whole. I've always enjoyed just making things. And for a longest time in my life, it didn't really care what it was that I was making. As I'm getting older, I'm slowly narrowing that list, and there are things that I prefer to make now and things that I don't want to make now. So my tastes are getting a little bit more refined, I guess.
I'm really lucky in that I get a lot of very satisfying moments, both in instructing the young drummers that we train here, but also with guests. Anytime I'm watching one of our performances and I see young guests or even older guests following along behind our fifes and drums, maybe playing on a toy drum that they picked up at the gift shop. Getting to see people wanting to participate in a history and in what we do in that way is always very satisfying to me. During the pandemic, we had to shut down a lot of our activities. But what amazed me so much is the diligence of our kids who work for us. Though they were on furlough, though they weren't able to get paid, they weren't able to come into Fife and Drum and work in that community environment. Many of them still found time to get together, either via Zoom or in person, and continue working on the music that they really have grown to enjoy playing.
Projects like building the Anderson Armory, repointing on these original buildings, rediscovering ancient technology, and actually getting close to a point where outside of Colonial Williamsburg, we're selling our materials. They're being used across really this whole mid-Atlantic region. There's bricks that we have made that have ended up in the White House. When I started here as a summer hire, I was just making brick and sweating a lot. That's the job, but it's kind of cool to see your work end up in a lot of unique places.
For me, one of the most satisfying things that I have studied and worked on has been the subject of cancer. The progression of this started out looking at women's disorders, and in doing so, I ended up falling into the idea of cancer related to women and specifically their bodies. So breast cancer became a very big subject. And of course, it's a hot topic in our modern world, the whole concept of cancer. And the amount of information that I have been able to put together on this subject has not only improved our interpretation at the shop, but it's also something that I've had an opportunity to share with a lot of people. Doing lectures for medical groups, the American Cancer Association. To me, it's probably the most satisfying area that I have looked into.
Well, that's great. For me, I would say that one of my most satisfying moments working in the shop was when I had the opportunity to work on a reproduction of the window from Mount Vernon. That was a really great project because personally for me, I had to learn a lot of new skills in order to build that. But also it was extremely satisfying that upon completion, it went up to Mount Vernon. It was in their museum for a period of time, but then they were planning to do some restoration on the original window. So for a period of time, they actually took the original window out and my window was in Mount Vernon. And just kind of gave you a sense of pride that here this window was back where it belonged, and I was able to help with their important work. So doing work here at the museum, but also work that contributed to another great Virginia house. What about you, Preston? What is a satisfying moment for you?
There's lots of them. Satisfying moments is when I can interpret to the guest and give them that aha. There's something they've never heard before about silver, mostly about how you keep the silver shiny, things like that. And there's no really tricks of the trade. It's just using your silver. Again, I started here as a young person, and if you've lived in Colonial Williamsburg, chances are your families worked here, your mom and dad and so forth. And Colonial Williamsburg had a program where every 25 years they would have a silver anniversary, and they present these silver bowls and as an anniversary for you. And I'm proud to say that my mom worked here, my dad's dad, and my bowl. So they're all displayed in the shop. And I talk about those. So that's pretty satisfying for me that I can talk about sort of the modern legacy of Colonial Williamsburg, of who worked here in the modern times. So it's pretty neat. I like that.
It seems satisfying. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, so I think both Ted and Preston so far have kind of hit it. That this really as a museum is a place for people, right? We like to talk to people, and that's I think the easiest answer. But diving into a little bit about us as interpreters here and tradesmen here, it didn't take long for me to realize that in carpentry the tool marks were the best way to analyze things, and the further you focused on tools, you started to realize the tools had a character of their own. So a few years back, I started to make my own tools. And I think there's a picture pull up. So there's a jack plane that I made, and that is the day that I finished building it. And it's nice, it's crisp, it's clean. And sure, a plane like that 250 years ago would have had a day that looked like that. But the reality is, the further and further I use that plane in my day-to-day life here, it's going to start to take on the characteristics that you see in the originals. So my goal that leads to a satisfying moment, if you will, is not only to make the tool, but then to use it to the point that that tool looks like it should from 250 years ago. So in a way, that's kind of the goal that I hope at the end of my career, my tools sort of have that look.
Yeah, and they talk about patina, but we know that's just a fancy word for sweat and dirt.
That's right.
Tia, what about you?
One really satisfying project that's actually taken a couple of years in the garden. We started some espalier fruit trees. And I think there should be a picture of one of our green gauge plums that you can take a look at, just to kind of get a sense of what that is. It's a tree started very small and then pruned in a very specific way to get this kind of two-dimensional shape. And for the apple trees in the garden, we were actually able to go from grafting the tree onto rootstock and establishing it, planting it in the ground, making those first year cuts and training it. So it's been a project that you don't just make and then put aside and you're done with that. It actually continues to need attention, and it's something that you really have to be patient and kind of wait for it to really come to fruition. So this past year, the apple trees actually started to flower for the first time, so it was really exciting to see that.
So it's great to see these projects come together, and again, it all comes back to the people. Not only our guests that are visiting, but the wonderful artisans that we have here that bring these trades to life every day. That concludes the formal portion of our presentation. We're going to take some questions now. So how are we doing, Bill?
We're doing great. Thank you all again. You all talked about some of your backgrounds and sort of how you got into this. Matt has a question. He's wondering, do you have to have a history degree to work in the trades? But maybe more broadly, could you talk about what are you all looking for when you bring somebody new into a trade shop?
I think that depends. Well, that's what's interesting about Clinton Williamsburg and the trades department itself. We have some shops in the past that have looked for practicing artisans to bring in to gain from their knowledge, but also so that there's less of a learning curve. There are some shops, like when I started in carpentry, I was not a carpenter before I started there, so I learned woodworking here at Clinton Williamsburg. So I was able to go through the process of that discovery on my own, and bring the trade forward. But as far as what we're looking for, you could be the best artisan in the world, but if you're not comfortable standing in front of a group of people and engaging them in a meaningful way, this just isn't the place for you. And that's not to downplay the work that's done away from Williamsburg. It's just that's why we're here. Again, the hand skill is incredibly important, but the presentation skills I think are of equal importance when it comes to trying to find a person that's a really good fit for what we do here. What do you guys think?
When I first started learning, Mr. Curtis, who taught me, he had a hard time, people who had been to school, metalsmithing school, he had a hard time unlearning what they learned in school. With an eye, I had an artistic eye, I took art, went to art school for a little bit, and he says, well, if you can draw these things, I can certainly teach you how to make these things. So I learned that way, like Ted. I started very young, and he taught me through the apprenticeship program. And that was from sort of ground and to where I am now. So pretty neat.
What about you two?
I mean, yeah, coming from the modern side of the trade and then going to the historic side, I mean, I didn't even particularly like history in school. But now I love it. I mean, and it was just maybe I didn't particularly enjoy military history, but having it in the context of, something that I'm really interested in, like now that's, one of the parts of it that keeps me most engaged is, learning new things and getting to like explore back into 18th century gardens.
How about you, Matt?
So I do have a bachelor's in early American history and did do graduate work in museum studies. But I think they helped me in some capacity, but I think the aspects that they helped me in is really the research, how to formulate a paper, right? I mean, in undergrad, doing a lot of papers. So how do you construct a good thesis? That is an oral interpretation. You can work your way right down a paper essentially. Not to say that an interpretation is a lecture; those are two separate things, but they do overlap quite a bit. So some of the work that I did learn in school has helped me, but other stuff, that apprenticeship is 100% there to teach you. So we shouldn't forget that too.
Yeah. So Doug was asking about, what is it that sort of keeps your hands engaged in the historic ways of doing these things, as opposed to, all right, we learn a little bit about this and then we go off and use some modern tools and techniques. What kind of keeps you all in historic trades, as opposed to just the trade in general?
For me, anybody can use modern tools. I mean, but to do what we do by hand, that's a skill. And it comes with learning and many years of experience in learning that. So that's the way I look at it.
Just like Preston said, it's tooling. The big difference there is looking at an original, and in carpentry in particular, replicating that. How do you do it? Not once, but 1,000 times. Sometimes literally. When you're talking about making shingles, it's thousands. So replicate.
What keeps me in historic work at home is the lack of any other shop to work in. So I'm true to the 18th century because I work unplugged because I don't really have a choice there. But I enjoy the work. I built a table, dining room table at home, and cut all the joints by hand and hand planed the whole thing. And it was very satisfying because I don't get to use the tools as often anymore. So for me, it was reconnecting with that handwork and getting to make a pile of shavings in the process of building that table.
Yeah, I'd say that the challenge of it, kind of keeps it fun and, okay, we could, pull out the modern tools to do this, but if we didn't, at the end of it, we get to say, this is, as close as we can get to authentic.
So how do you feel about the health of doing this? And a lot of times people will come into our shops and say, people don't do this anymore, or it's dying, or it's disappearing, and there's some of that, but Gary's kind of curious about, how do you see this 30 years from now? Do you have hope, I guess, is the question.
I am incredibly optimistic. I have hope. Colonial Williamsburg is coming up on a milestone anniversary. In 2026, we'll have 100 years of being a cultural institution. Historic trades did not start that long behind that. So, we're going to be at, really close to 90 years with that same anniversary. And, the thing that has kept trades going is that we evolve. We become what is needed to help this institution continue to thrive. And we're not only making things that are used here and putting things back into the museum, but we are continuing to build a body of knowledge that is going to continue to grow and prosper. And the thing that is always the most satisfying to me is watching every generation of craftsperson that comes here try and do better and try and be better and learn from what we have built here. So I think we're poised to have a really good 30 years, 50 years, 100 years to come with historic trades and skills.
That's awesome.
So maybe on the more challenging side, Kat was wondering, the materials are going to be different often today than they were in the 18th century. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what sort of challenges does that pose?
Sure, I think Teal touched on that with some of the seeds, right? I mean,
Oh yeah, I mean, just, having to do some detective work and figuring out, what is the right thing to use. There are some named varieties of plants that, we have a description, a name, it all matches. That's, someone's been saving these seeds for 300 years. Other stuff, you might have to go look at illustrations, and just kind of take a guess, with what the closest heirloom variety that's available is. And some things have disappeared.
yeah, Matt, you can
Yeah.
speak to that with timber for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so building a building 250 years ago is a little bit different than building a building today. Not only do we have to actually do it according to modern day code in some cases, so we have that obstacle sometimes to deal with, but the material itself, the trees, an old growth tree from 250 years ago could be over 1,000 years old. And just how that tree has formed is going to give you a different product than what we have today, which is third or maybe even fourth growth. So it's definitely a different challenge, but we try our best.
It's also juggling too with the buildings. We're not just trying to make the most authentic building possible, but we're also thinking about trying to make these buildings last for generations. So there's that historic preservation element that we always have to consider as well. What about you for materials?
With silver, of course, it's recycled. So it's always going to be around with silver. So for the future, it's melting things down, and recreating 18th century things are what we do. So it's people are always looking for putting out cash for gold, cash for silver, and all. So hopefully we'll be around for a while.
Well, that has a nice 18th century pairing too, right? Because wasn't a lot of your stuff made from recycled
Yeah,
goods,
absolutely,
right?
absolutely, absolutely.
So many folks, of course, when they visit your shops today, they see you working on things, but they're mostly there for the interpretation and seeing what you're working on, but they don't see what happens to it. And BJ was curious about what happens with the stuff that you make, and I think for all of your trades, it's probably a little bit different sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, our things are sold. People come in and like what we do. Again, we were saying earlier, Colonial Williamsburg has a vast collection of silver items. So the things that you actually see in the houses and all are the things that are original. They're all original pieces and all. So they really don't really have any need for what we make in there. But the things we do make them available to the guests to buy. So and it's fun to do that. That's another satisfying part of my job is that people really want what we do and what we make there. So that's pretty neat. Yeah.
That's good. Tia?
A lot of the produce grown in our gardens is actually used in another trade shop in town. So most of it goes to the folks working at the Governor's Palace Kitchen. That's our historic foodways trade. And we also have a relationship with the chefs at the Williamsburg Inn. And sometimes they'll be able to use some of what we've grown and things that they can serve. So it's really neat to get to actually see it put to use.
And most of your stuff stays, right?
Yeah, yeah. So kind of like what you were seeing in some of the videos with Mark in the blacksmith shop and Kenneth on the brickyard. When we're talking about building a building, most of that's for here. And we're trying to replicate what's found in archaeology here, and we'll put those buildings back. So if you stop in and see us, take a look at the blacksmith shop. Our crew built that building. And exactly where it once stood, looking as close to the original as we can get it. So throughout the building trades, which was of course what Ted was as well as a joiner, all four of those trades are really trying to put these buildings back for Colonial Williamsburg. That's our main goal.
I'm glad you mentioned the archaeologists because it's not just historic trades here that's bringing this work back to life. I mean, there's so many contributors from across the foundation, different departments and divisions that help us day in and day out, putting in front of guests the best possible information and the best possible artifacts.
I think we have time for one last question today. I'm curious about what you all are looking forward to in the near future. Any big projects on the horizon that you'd like to share with folks?
I'll start with you two.
Sure, we've actually got two really exciting things going on in the garden this season. We kind of wanted to show some other styles of gardening that would be found here in Virginia in the 18th century, aside from wealthy households' backyards. So we have just started a plot that is going to show an American Indian garden and the traditional varieties as well as planting techniques. And then right across from that is our Sankofa Heritage Garden, which is showing the garden that you may have found on a plantation if the enslaved people there are allowed a small garden plot in addition to their rations. And it ends up having a lot of West African influence. So both of those will be really interesting to see just in comparison to each other, to the other things that we're growing. So definitely if you're in town, stop in and take a look at those.
It's exciting. Matt, I know you've got a little bit of work ahead.
Yeah, we've got a number of buildings on our horizon. Pushing through a few for our brickyard. They're getting a series of new buildings at the brickyard right behind the carpenter's yard. After that, and sort of at the same time, we're building a series of structures for the new farm site. But down the road, I think a lot of us on the crew are I'm speaking for them, but speaking for me personally as well, I'm really looking forward to the First Baptist Church. And that's still in the archaeological stage, but once they finish that up and we get moving on that project a little bit more physically as far as putting the frame together, that's going to be a very fun project to complete.
Yeah, it's important.
We're always making things for the shops in town, so we're staying pretty busy. We always are making gifts for dignitaries and here in Colonial Williamsburg and all, so we're staying busy with that. And again, then we're talking about research part of the research, what we do, looking forward to different aspects of who were making these things in the 18th century, and we're always in depth into just looking at that. So we're looking forward to the research and just keep doing what we're doing here, so keeping people happy.
All right, well, thank you, Matt, Ted, Preston, Teal, for joining us today and for making the things you make and keeping all these things alive and sharing them with everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and for your great comments and questions. This project was funded in part by a generous grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and as always, was made possible through the generosity of our donors. Thank you. To learn how you can contribute, please follow the links pinned to the comments below or join us at colonialwilliamsburg.org. Do y'all have any final thoughts to send us on our way today?
Again, I know we always say thank you to our guests for visiting us, but I hope what the guests will take away and what you've seen represented on this panel and the folks in the video is the passion that is so prevalent throughout this department. We don't do this for the accolades. We do this because it's important work and it's sometimes overlooked but never unappreciated. So thank you all, and I truly appreciate the work.
Yes. Thank you.